Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another live stream lecture with the Historical Society of Frankfurt. I'm Vanessa here, controlling the streaming here, and I'm going to quickly turn this over to our speaker tonight, John Buffington, who is presenting our lecture with a history on the Frankfurt Arsenal. So lots of good info there. And here we have, welcome, John. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You're on.
Thank you very much. An arsenal is a military facility where what's called ordnance is stored. Ordnance is any supplies that the military needs. Anything, obviously, weapons and ammunition, also boots and shoes, and uniforms and parachutes and tanks and everything else that the military ever has occasion to use. It can also be a place where such things are manufactured, and Frankfurt Arsenal was that as well from the very beginning in 1816, although it was not doing much in the way of manufacturing other than gunpowder early on, or I guess bullets, making bullets with the gunpowder early on. Later got into small arms manufacturing. And in the mid-19th century, they graduated to a mechanized system for doing some serious manufacturing there. And by the time the place closed, they had a really big plant that was doing a whole lot of military manufacturing, mostly with civilian employment. Now, the distribution function from an arsenal is the key thing for where you put it, because you need to have it where you can quickly move things from where they're stored at the arsenal to where they're going to be used in times of trouble. Sometimes times of trouble come up rather quickly, so you need rapid transportation. Frankfurt Arsenal's advantage in that regard is that it was at the intersection of a great river and a navigable stream. The creek was navigable at the time for the ships of the day, which were obviously smaller than current ones, and it was a whole lot more of a creek then than it is now due to channelization and diversion of water to the sewer systems in Philadelphia. So that was an important factor. The other factor in locating an arsenal is it has to be defensible. And the value in that particular location was it's upstream in the river far enough that in a pinch, barriers can be put into the river to keep an invading navy from getting to the arsenal. Sometimes in a real pinch, they'll sink a ship in the middle of the channel at the last minute to stop the incoming fleet. So I think that the selection of that location was very carefully thought through. The river obviously is important to lots of purposes. The preceding hundreds of years before settlement, the people who of the culture that lived there, their name for the name for the river was Lenape, which means where the water flows in the language of that culture. And they called themselves Lenape, which obviously means that they thought of themselves, their self-image was that they were the people where the water flows. which I think is quite an interesting point. They identified themselves so thoroughly with the river, and that's because they were very dependent on the river. The Lenape were not particularly a nomadic people, although we think of Frankford Avenue as being a traveling path for the Lenape and other Native American cultures. They traveled, but they also had permanent, semi-permanent. They had homes that didn't move around a lot because they farmed. In addition to fishing and hunting, and hunting's obviously better closer to the river than other places, in addition to the fishing being available. So the Lenape were very much identified with the river. Frankford Avenue, which was their path, is one at the point where the arsenal is. Frankford Avenue is 1.1 mile above the river. And that, I think, has to do with the fact that the river in those days, prior to the coming of intense English and Swedish occupation of the area, the river was free to meander wherever it wanted to go, and so it would move. The river would change location from time to time, and the Lenape liked to be above where it might be muddy, just above the floodplain. So my theory is every time they found themselves getting muddy feet going up and down their path, the path would move just a little bit further away from the river. So it ended up about a mile above the waterline. So the Lenape ended up essentially selling their interest in that area to William Penn, and in due course departed the area. By the time John Adams was in Philadelphia doing the thing that the founding fathers did about starting an enterprise to be known as, which eventually became known as the United States of America. In 1775, Adams was here on that business, and you can't work all the time. They decided to have a picnic. Adams and Benjamin Rush and some other folks got on a boat and came up to a place which Adams identified as Point No Point. The reason it was Point No Point was there was an optical illusion. As you came up the river, it looked like there was a point of land there, but when you got close, you realized that there wasn't actually a point of land. So it's Point No Point. This is not peculiar to this location. I find that there's one in Maryland that's called Point No Point still today, and one in the state of Washington, there's a Point No Point. Anyway, Adams liked that spot so well, he wrote a seriously raving letter about that general spot and the trip there. He came back again on horseback. He got up at 4:30 in the morning and got on his horse while he was at the convention, and rode out there just as a matter of recreation to see the place again. And he wrote to Benjamin Rush years later, reminding him of that event. And he wrote to Abigail as well, telling her what a good time he'd had. So Point No Point is essentially where we're talking about the arsenal having ultimately been located. The Congress didn't. The first arsenal in Philadelphia was in South Philadelphia. And I think that was because it was close to where the ships were being built. There were ships being built in Philadelphia from the earliest days of the Republic. So prior to the War of 1812, there was an arsenal in South Philadelphia, Schuylkill Arsenal, here we go, 1794, oh no, 1802 to 1806 they started construction in 1802 and they finished it in 1806. So as of the War of 1812, that was the arsenal here. The experience in 1812 was we didn't have enough military facilities to fight a war. And a lot of people were very annoyed about that. And so Congress authorized the creation of a bunch of different of new arsenals, and for the reasons I was discussing, one of them ended up at Frankfurt. And that got started in 1816. The first building completed is what's now called Building 14. The way the arsenal's laid out, let's do the overhead picture, please, Vanessa. There's the layout of the arsenal. Now, what you have there, the rectangle that you can sort of identify, that's the oldest part. And thank you, that's enough. If you think of the arsenal as the old part of the arsenal, the old original part of the arsenal, where the first buildings are, and where all the ones that are on the historic register are. If you think of it as a football field, Building 14, which was the first one completed, faces Bridge Street. It's called actually the West Storage Building, storage house. And at the other end is the East Storage House. So the arsenal isn't actually perfectly north, south, east, west, but it's close enough to think of it that way. Bridge Street runs along the west end. Tacony Street runs along the north side. And those two buildings are the west and the east storage buildings are at the center of those two ends. West Storehouse wasn't built until 1835. East Storehouse has to have been finished in 1816 or so. It was there are two books. I looked for help on this project to basically two books about the history and elements of the arsenal. One is Dr. James Farley, who was a teacher at Northeast High School, taught social studies. He was a PhD in history. And his book is a historian's book. The other one is called the Milner Report. John Milner Associates did a report. The Farley book is 1994. John Milner's book, the Milner book, was commissioned by the Corps of Engineers. No, not the Corps of Engineers. Well, it was commissioned by the Army anyway. As the Army was getting ready to turn the arsenal over to the city of Philadelphia, essentially, first. They wanted to do detailed work on the architectural values there and get it on the register, to the extent that it was justified, put it on the historic register, and it did go on the historic register. And the Milner report gives a lot of, it's done from the point of view of an architectural historian, not a general historian. Dr. Farley was a general, Dr. Farley's book is history. The Milner report is architectural history. And the difference between architectural history and history is historians like stories. They appreciate architectural details as well, as much as anybody else with an eye, but they include architectural details when they're relevant to the story. Architectural historians like stories as much as anybody else, but what they talk about is architectural detail, and they include the stories to the extent that it's relevant to the architectural details. So it's a slightly different emphasis, and it's real interesting comparing those emphases in those two books. I think Dr. Farley got one thing wrong. He claimed that Building 11 was there in 1817 when the foundation, when the cornerstone was laid by James Madison. James Madison came to town. He had finished his presidency, and he came all the way up from Virginia out of retirement to lay the cornerstone for the arsenal, although a couple of buildings, at least a couple of buildings, had already been completed at the time. And as of that point, Building 2 had been completed. Farley and the Milner report agree on this. Now can we see Building 2, please? Vanessa? Here we go. Yeah, that is the current condition of Building 2. It's kind of sad. It's just standing there deteriorating. Okay, thank you. And that really was the instigating factor for talking about the arsenal tonight. I would love to attract some attention that might perhaps turn into some effort to organize a campaign of some sort. I hope that there's going to be interest in it. It really is a shame to let that building go and not do anything about it. There is some interest in some areas of government in doing something about it, but nobody has a serious plan put together yet. We need to be ready to help if possible. Maybe we need to organize ourselves into a campaign of some sort. I would love to hear from folks if they'd like to do something about that building. The building, it's now called Building 2 and 3. Building 2 was there in 1817. Building 3 was added on. It's an extension essentially of Building 2, and that went in 1835. Building 1 now. Oh, okay. So that where those are, that would be the northeast corner of the football field, if you think of it that way. The Building 11, which Dr. Farley says was there at the time of that dedication, and was, he says, the first administrative offices for the arsenal for the first several years. The Milner report says that was built in 1850, much later. I think what happened there must be that there was a building, a pre-existing building on that site that got torn down or incorporated into building number 11. It's part of a charter school now. It looks very nice, and it looks just like an 1850s building to me, not a federal building that would go back as far as 1817. But it's an interesting conflict between those two sources. I'd love to follow up on that. So in the first years of the arsenal, it was just military folks there, and it was originally 20 acres. They started hiring civilians around the 1860s. They did a good bit of expanding for the war in the 1860s. And there are a lot of buildings that were added during or right after that conflict. You can go around and you can see the date stones that'll say 1865, 1866, 1867. Not so much during the war. And those are really interesting big buildings, and none of them are on any historic register. None of them have any protection at all at this point. Mostly they're vacant, and they're sitting there. Now, it's been quite interesting getting ready for this talk that a lot of the response we've gotten from people hearing about it has been from people who are interested in that particular period of history, people who are associated with organizations that do that sort of thing. I happen to have friends in the GAR. We have some of you, probably everybody that is interested in that subject knows the GAR Museum in Frankfurt. That's our sister organization, and I go to their meetings, so I have some friends there, and I invited them to spread the word on this, and I think they did a wonderful job. I think we've drawn a fair crowd for this tonight who are interested in that particular aspect of arsenal history, which is not what I prepared myself to talk about too much tonight. The thing is, there's too much to cover to do it in one lecture anyway. So I would like to come back and do at least one more lecture, probably at least two more lectures at a later date when I've done more work on other stretches of time at the arsenal. And I would love to have some help. Maybe some of the people that are watching tonight or see this subsequently would like to get in touch and sign up to help me get that stuff done, and then we can do it sooner rather than later. We also heard in advance of doing the talk from some folks who had family that worked in the arsenal in the latter days of its operation. The arsenal peaked during World War II. They had to expand rapidly, obviously, to meet the needs of the military during World War II. And they needed to expand so much that the military really couldn't do it all. And so they did a creative thing. They expanded by bringing people from the civilian sector businesses in to Frankfurt Arsenal and teaching them how to do what the military people had been doing before the war. And so there, industrial production of military support is really, it takes a big leap thanks to the production facility at Frankfurt Arsenal and the training that the people who knew how to make armaments gave to people who were in private industry and were prepared to take that on. It's quite an interesting relationship that developed. I would love to hear from folks who are interested in that aspect too, but that's a kind of a sad part of the story, because most of the World War II, in fact, I guess all of the World War II buildings got knocked down just a couple of years ago, I guess. I'm a little late getting on the subject to do anything about that, except for maybe some of you folks who are interested in that part of the history can work with me on documenting more of the story of the latter days of the arsenal, even though the buildings aren't there to be saved. At the end of Dr. Farley's book, he comments on interviews that were done with former Arsenal employees back when it was first disestablished. And he quotes 5 of them directly: Arthur Hewitt, Helen Hewitt, Ed Carroll, Kathleen Liggins, and Claire Redinger, or Redinger. And he summarizes what they all said, those people and many others said in these interviews as follows. Consistently and without exception, the voices of the 20th century workers tell us what the 19th century records only hinted at. The Frankfurt Arsenal was considered a great place to work. That is a wonderful, wonderful comment. And I'm just real impressed that they were able to achieve that, the military management at Frankfurt Arsenal. Now, I skipped over when I was talking about the importance of arsenals. Okay, the need to defend them and all. I omitted the point that our revolution began with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And what that was about was we got wind, the militia, the Massachusetts militia got wind of it, that the British were going to march to Concord and seize the arsenal that they maintained at Concord. The Massachusetts militia thought that arsenal was important enough to start the American Revolution over. Similarly, in 1859, John Brown wanted to start a war to end slavery. And the way he went about it was to attack the arsenal at Harper's Ferry in what was then Virginia. And a lot of historians will tell you that that was the real beginning of the conflict that really got, not Fort Sumter, that Fort Sumter was inevitable after John Brown's raid on that particular arsenal. Arsenals is important. And I think that has to be kept in mind in deciding what's worth keeping and what's worth treasuring. And I hope that we can get some help in sort of planning to do better on that. Have a couple of stories on the history around the time of the Civil War. One of the Arsenal's commanders was a man named Josiah Gorgas. He was from Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, but he married a woman from Alabama. And he was the arsenal commander from 1860 until March of 1861. And the reason he quit was he was sympathetic with his wife's family and with the Confederacy. So he resigned and went south. And he had his furniture packed up and had it sent after him after he had left the place for Alabama. And some of the junior officers thought he must have ordered munitions removed from the arsenal. And that started a rumor which persisted and followed the man for the rest of his life. He ended up being the chief of ordnance for the Confederate Army. And after the war, that rumor about his having stolen munitions, he could have been hung for that. It was explored by a military investigation, and they cleared him. But it is still being passed around in some circles to this day, even though he was cleared by a military investigation. He turned out he didn't get any other trouble, didn't ever come back up here. He ended up being the president of the University of Alabama. His story was told, that's the one story that John Manton chose for his book on Frankfurt Arsenal. This is John Manton's book. It's The Borough of Frankfurt, covers the period from 1800 to 1920. It's not, the arsenal is just one of the many topics covered. He tells a story or two, or sometimes more, about just about everything having to do with Frankfurt history. It's a wonderful, wonderful introductory course in Frankfurt history. We have copies available. John Manton gave us the reproduction rights for that book. We get all of the profits from the sale. That's $20. If anybody wants it, what we do, you can buy it for $20 from the publisher, lulupress.com. But if you'd like to join the Historical Society, we make it available to anyone who makes a contribution which covers at least $25, because we need the $5 for shipping. And by the way, it's that Lulu charges for shipping and taxes. If you join with us, you're not paying any more than you would with Lulu, probably less. We would love to have you join, and we would send you the book as a premium if you send us a contribution in excess of, at or above $25. Can't tell what I'm reading there. Join, oh yeah, Vanessa's reminding me to say you can join at the website. It's the Frankford web, www.thefrankfordhistorical.
The Historical Society of Frankford.
The Historical Society of Frankford, yeah. So anybody who joins, by the way, gets a refrigerator magnet in appreciation of joining. We love to have members, and we love to expand our membership. It would much improve our position to try to take care of the history. Our mission is to preserve and promote the history of Frankfurt and nearby communities. And the more members we have, the better we can do that. So we'd be glad to have you if you're not a member already. One of the things going on right now is that PennDOT is getting ready to do some work on the on and off ramps for I-95, which are very close to the Arsenal. And they have decided to take that, well, they have decided that it is necessary to take out a section of the wall along Tacony Street. And they recognize that is damaging, that requires some mitigation. Under the Federal Highway Act, they have to do something to make up for doing some damage there. And I cannot see that from here. Oh yeah, I'm being reminded to mention that if you join, mention in that just be sure to mention that you want the book. Just mention it in the gift section, she says, okay. So currently, the PennDOT is getting ready to take out a portion of wall, and to make up for that, they're doing a couple of mitigation steps, one of which is to fix a sort of leaning tower. It's called the machine gun tower, which is in the middle of that wall just before where they're going to start taking out wall. The machine gun tower is from World War I. It needs some repair. They're gonna fix that, and they're they're going to do some repairs to the wall before that point, coming away from Bridge Street as you go along the wall. There's some poorly done work, and there's some new repairs needed, and so they're gonna do some stuff there by way of making up for having to take out some wall further along there. And they are going to put in a stoplight at the Bridge Street entrance to the Arsenal, which is very good for all concerned, because the kids that come by way of the buses that run along Bridge Street to go to the two charter schools get off the bus and have to get across the street. So if they have a stoplight there, they'll be much safer. We're all glad that that's going to happen. So those are things that are going on. How's my time going? What time is it?
Oh, sorry, you're about 45 minutes, John.
45 minutes.
I am at 45 minutes. Oh, gee, I guess right. Okay. Here's the full referral reference for the Milner report I should have given. Historical and Archaeological Survey of Frankford Arsenal, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. John Milner Associates, Westchester, Pennsylvania. Was not widely distributed. So it's kind of hard to find. It is available in some libraries. They have it at the Army Heritage Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and they are in the process of digitizing. I'm going to try to make sure that we make it available through our system as soon as it's available through theirs, and it will be very useful in further work, I think, on Frankfurt Arsenal. So with that, what do we have if there are any questions? Oh, Jerry, I skipped you.
Oh, okay.
I forgot about 1824. Jerry Kalankowitz is our president, as many know. I'm sorry. And he has a story of his own about the Arsenal.
Hi, everybody. It's me again. I gave the lecture the last couple weeks. I'm going to talk about Lafayette's visit to Frankfurt Arsenal in the year 1824. Several decades after the revolution had passed, General Lafayette was invited to return to visit the United States. So what I have here in front of me is our original copies of the Saturday Evening Post from the year 1824. So it was sometime earlier in the year that Lafayette was invited to come to the United States, and he accepted. And so Saturday Evening Post was a weekly publication. It was called Saturday Evening Post because it was originally published on Saturday every week. It was a weekly, I wouldn't call it a magazine like it was in the later years in our lifetime. It was originally basically a 4-page newspaper. And every week they would give updates on the progress of Lafayette's visits. In those days, Lafayette was basically the 19th century version of a rock and roll star, and his tour throughout the eastern United States, what was then the United States, largely the East Coast, was covered very extensively, and every week there's an update in the Saturday Evening Post about what General Lafayette did. So you notice I have my special white gloves on to handle this original document. This comes This is the original stuff from the year 1824. It was put together in a bound edition. So every week there's some kind of update, and people would actually write poems to General Lafayette. So I'd like to read one of those to you now, if I can see it. Okay. Called Lines on Lafayette. Welcome, Fayette, to Columbia's shore. Welcome, thou friend of the free. Thy name shall echo till time is no more, and emblazoned in glory shall be. Welcome, the man who in peril's dark hour, when war's tempests our country beset, left friends and a home, his succor to pour, o'er Columbia's land, Lafayette. Thy name shall be echoed by thousands unborn, thy virtues will ne'er shall forget, who in battle did bravely the storm. Thy watchword was freedom, Fayette. Soft be thy pillow, thou bravest of men. Soft shall thy pillow of rest. May heaven's archangel thy couch nightly tend, and guard thee to lands of the bleak. When to regions of night thy spirit shall fly, when to nature thou payest thy debt, affliction will start from each swelling eye, a tear to thy memory, Lafayette. So that's just one of many, many poems that had appeared every week in anticipating the arrival of General Lafayette. So I wisely took the precaution of blowing up the part that I was going to read that covers the part about the Frankford Arsenal. So at 2 o'clock on Saturday last, General entered Trenton, attended by Governor Williamson and a large number of citizens. Well, that's the Trenton part. I'll skip that. So he left Trenton on the route to the city, and from Trenton to Bristol, the roads were lined with the yeomanry of the country, with its females. Apparently, he was a sex symbol too. That he was very much sought after by the women. And see, already these gloves are getting dirty from handling this stuff. Okay, so on the route to the city and from Trenton to Bristol, the roads were lined with the yeomanry of the country with its females. Everywhere, acclamations announced his approach. One deep tone of enthusiasm possessed all hearts and animated all minds. Governor Schultz modestly declined accepting the honor of a seat in the carriage with the general. The cavalcade arrived at Frankfurt at 7 o'clock in the evening, and a letter says that the town presented that night a scene of unrivaled splendor and joy. A brilliant and tasteful illumination of immense crowd of spectators, the beauty of the decorations, the elegance of the arch, and the arch was something that we built here in Frankfurt, but it was also done everywhere he went. Basically, they built him an arch to ride through and to shower him with garlands when he went underneath it. So he went under the arch, and then the mingling of tongues, the laughing of voices, the delightful music, the shouts and benedictions of multitudes all contributed to render the arrival of the illustrious Lafayette one of those events which a people do not easily forget. The general passed through Frankfurt and arrived at the arsenal at 7:15, accompanied by the governor and suite, and after receiving the warm congratulations of the throng, retired to adjust his dress but reappeared in a short time. Several ladies were introduced to him immediately on his arrival, whom he received with his usual affability and benevolence of manner. So I think we can assume that he stayed at the commandant's residence at the arsenal. So that's my part. So if we have any questions or comments, we'll try to address them.
So I'm jumping back in here so that I can feed all of the comments and questions, of which there are quite a few. I'm gonna start at the top and work our way down. So let's see. There's also a couple lovely comments about people that mentioned they had family members that worked at the arsenal, and we do encourage you to send us, even by email, any information that you have, remembrances of such tenures at the site. Sarah Brooks Whedon mentions that her third great grandfather worked at the arsenal starting in 1858 as a painter. He was enlisted man who stayed on after his enlistment was up. His son also worked there for 70 years, also as a painter. So that's very sweet to share. And then we got into the point of the lecture where, John, you were mentioning saving the building 2 that's in disrepair. And Susan Valentin just says, tell us what you need us to do or sign to save this historic site. I know that there are some ideas being thrown around. One of them is, I know there's someone out there that wants to perhaps make it a home for veterans. I don't know if we were going to talk more about that, but there is info about that out there.
Yeah, the answer to the question, what can I do right now, is provide us with your contact information so I can start accumulating a list of people who are interested in the subject. And if there's going to be a number of us, I suppose we could start by doing a petition. Everybody might be interested in signing a petition of some sort. We can explore that question of what the status of the specific proposal is about the veterans home, and see whether that's gotten to the stage where it should be specifically mentioned in the petition, or whether it would just be a more general thing. I'm not quite to the point of having that drafted yet, but I'd love to hear that there are some people who would like their names on such a thing.
So how about let's tell everyone who's interested in being active in this, please send it. We'll create an email list so that we can pass out information and keep in touch. So just either private message us on Facebook or get in touch with us via our website and mention that in either a comment or in an email. So our website, www.thehistoricalsocietyofFrankford.org. And of course, if you're watching on Facebook, you can just message us on there.
Joining the society that wouldn't hurt either. The more members we have, the more influential we are.
Indeed. Then we have Julia here, who was wondering what Building 2 was used for. And then an interesting comment about, does the GAR Museum know about the building? She knows they're looking for a new home. I imagine they do know about the building, but you would probably know more about that, John.
If they didn't before, they do now.
Yes.
The building was quarters. From the beginning, it was quarters. I found one reference at one point. The commandant, Jerry mentioned that probably Lafayette stayed in the commandant's quarters. Building 1, the commandant's quarters, was finished in 1824, according to the Milner book. Milner does not mention anything about the Lafayette visit, nor for that matter, I don't believe Dr. Farley did either. So I'm a little bit at sea as to whether the Commandant's Quarters #1 was actually ready by the time of the Lafayette visit. Maybe it certainly would be the logical place if it was finished in time. Maybe they hurried up and finished it just for that purpose. But there is at least one rumor that I did notice that the Commandant stayed in building #2 while they were working on building #1, getting building #1 ready for him to occupy. But it was quarters. Building #2 was quarters.
Okay. This one's another kind of idea for the building. Contact the schools who are located on site. Teachers and students may find this a great project and rally their parents and others. That's definitely a great idea. And I think one thing that John and I talked about was hopefully this lecture will be accessible to the students of those schools. So yeah, hopefully we can reach out to them. If you know any people that have children enrolled, please feel free to share the link of the live stream. These live stream lectures, all of them are still available in Facebook and on YouTube, even after the live stream. The beauty of joining the live stream, though, is that you get to ask these questions and get to have them answered. So we love that you are here in the live time, but don't forget that, yes, you can definitely refer people to check these things out afterwards.
I did find a contact at each of the 2 schools, but that was very late, close to showtime. We didn't allow much time for planning this program, but yeah. I did find a person on the staff at each of the 2 schools to notify how far that spread from those individual people, though within the school cultures. I can't speak to. I hope we did get some viewers tonight from the schools.
I hope so, and if not, hopefully they'll watch later on. Next here we have just a nice mention of Elizabeth's grandfather was a warehouseman at the Arsenal and retired from there. And Susan also, she made a lot of comments tonight. We love that so much. Thanks, Susan. Hiring a dig for any artifacts that might be in the arsenal. And also, I think Brian Harris kind of piggybacked on that idea later on, wondering if that could be a possibility. I don't even know who would be contacted for the proposal of such a thing. So that's something that maybe we can throw around. John, do you know anything about how digs come to be for historical artifacts?
There was digs, meaning doing archaeology at the arsenal?
I would imagine so, yeah.
Okay. Archaeology was done at the arsenal by the Milliner people under their contract with the Army. And that book has a certain amount of detail, which I didn't have time to go through thoroughly, but there is some information in the Milliner report on the result of the archaeological study.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's good to know. This one's a pretty straightforward question. Who owns the arsenal land and buildings right now?
That is a little complicated, but the story is basically the Army decided to turn it over to the city of Philadelphia, turn control over the city of Philadelphia. City of Philadelphia worked out a collaboration with Mark Hankin. Now, what's the official name of that? Hankin Associates, I think it may be. They're basically the driver of all business concerning the arsenal at this point. The Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation still has an ownership interest to some extent. The PIDC intends to get out of the business of owning any part of the arsenal as soon as PennDOT finishes its work on the ramps. So at that point, there will be no more city ownership. I guess I'm not sure what the contractual arrangements are, whether Hankin's buying them out or what that is all about. Now, for the land right there on the parade ground, that's been turned into a condominium. The buildings, some of them have been sold, and the buildings themselves are owned by the businesses that occupy them, but not the land. The land is, all of the land in that parade ground area, all of that is condominium, owned by the condominium association. And as with any condominium, the developer retains control until all or most of the condominium memberships are sold. So at this point, Hankin's in control, although not in ownership of some of the real estate.
Okay. Next, we have Fred Moore, a dear friend of the Historical Society. He asks, when was the wall along Tacony Street constructed?
That was addressed in the materials that were sent out in connection with the PennDOT section. It's called Section 106. The highway, I guess I don't know, it's a Section 106. Section 106 of some piece of federal legislation requires that the developer, that a government agency that's doing work that may affect the historical integrity of a property that's on a historic register has to consult interest groups, that is to say us. The Historical Society of Frankford was one of the groups that consulted in connection with the I-95 ramp work. And in doing that, they had some pretty good contractors do the research on that work as well. I have those materials, or do I? I may not have them anymore. We can retrieve that stuff. The PennDOT consultants are very helpful. We can get that stuff back and find the answer to that question in there. The wall that's being taken out is the newer part of the wall along there. The stone part that's going to be fixed is the older part.
Okay, good. And, oh yeah, it looks like Bruce mentioned that in the comments as well. Fred Moore also asks if we have a copy of the April 7th, 1832 issue of the Saturday Evening Post. It reportedly has a woodcut print of the arsenal, and I'm thinking we may have a copy of that, or at least it sounds like we do have some copy of that image, the woodcut, because I know I heard Susan talking about that earlier.
Yeah, I looked for that. I wanted to show that, the original one that we have, but I couldn't find that. Luckily, I was able to find this edition here, but that this one stopped short before we get to that date. So, and I couldn't find any other ones in there. So I don't know where that is, but I did look for that because
So
I saw the date and I thought, oh, good, they give the date. So I thought, but I couldn't find the volume that it was Yeah, we have a copy of it, but that's not the original one.
Okay. Okay, so we have a copy of it in the book there. Okay.
That's the Farley book.
Okay, the Farley book, yeah. And I did post a link to that at the University of Pennsylvania printing press. If anyone's interested, it's in the comments as well for that book. And Fred Moore also asks, when was the oldest section of the wall built? I'm going to guess answer there is probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
And would be
Well, that woodcut that we just saw, it doesn't show the wall in it, so it had to have been built after 1832.
Okay. Well, cool. I think we've gotten to mostly the end, except lastly here is another lovely little comment about Preston, who was a paper boy at the Frankfurt Arsenal for years. Went to all the buildings. He lives across the street from the Arsenal. So very cool. I mean, the Arsenal definitely touched a lot of people's lives. And I think we just kind of scratched the surface of it here tonight. But that was really interesting and well-spoken, John. I really enjoyed listening to everything.
Yeah, I can use all the help I can get working up the rest of the details. There's a lot to be said about the Arsenal's history between 1850 and 1870.
Yeah, there's definitely more where all this came from. So, John, your thoughts on doing subsequent lectures are definitely a great idea, and it sounds like people would be appreciative considering the response that we got tonight. So let's keep the comments and the conversation going, and tell us what you want to hear about, and always give us some feedback about your personal histories and family histories as well, and that will also help just spur more stories to pop out. And that's kind of all I got for tonight. I think you guys did a great job. Thanks so much, John and Jerry.
Thank you to everybody who had questions and comments.
Indeed. So I take it we're signing off. And
Good night.
what was that?
I said, see you next month.
See you next month. We don't know exactly the topic yet, but it was. Stay tuned. It's coming up.
Good night.
Good night.